Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool, and today we are speaking about the underrepresentation of women in the media, but also celebrating those women who do raise their voices. Now, after the break, we are going to be speaking to Kathy Magrobi, who is the founder and director of Quote This Woman, an organization that is compiling a database of women to give to journalists and media so that more women's voices can be quoted. But before that, we are going to have a look at a short video about women raising their voices. Let's have a look.
Imagine if growing up you never heard the voices of women. No mum to teach you how to look after yourself, or no Google saying that you're the brightest star in the entire universe. At Quote This Woman, our mission is to make sure that women's voices are heard, really heard. So we work to amplify women's voices in mainstream news. So normally, only 1 in 5 news experts are women. The other 4 experts, they're men. And at certain times, like during elections, the gender gap widens even more, and it's 1 woman's voice for every 7 to 8 men. In societies that silence women's voices, there's more violence, less peace, more inequality, and less justice. Quote This Woman wants to change that.
At Quote This Woman Plus, we curate a database of Woman Plus trailblazers, activists, and experts, so journalists have reliable, trustworthy, and highly qualified sources they can use. In our first 2 months, during the elections, we had a list of 40 Women Plus experts. Our database was used from Paris to Nairobi, New York to Beijing. Since the elections, we've gained 10 new volunteers. Together, we've grown this list of experts to 350 and counting. When COVID hit, we responded with a COVID database. During lockdown, we doubled the size of the COVID database every 2 weeks.
That was a short video on women, visibility, and voice. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are in studio with Kathy Magrobi from Quote This Woman. That is an initiative that aims to increase the representation of women in the news. And Kathy, I don't know if I've said this correctly, but welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lenina. It's lovely to be here.
So, Kathy, just to take us into what is Quote This Woman and why and how was it started?
So we're a feminist nonprofit, and we're working to really bring gender justice to the media. And we've got the database of the most awesome women and other marginalized experts that journalists from all media can call upon to close the gender gap in who gets to make the news. And we started just before the 2019 elections, because every time I turned on the radio or the TV, or I opened the newspaper or scrolled for news on my laptop, the only opinions that I found were from men. And Lenina, if you remember, that was a really critical election. It was going to be, was it Cyril or was it going to be JZ? and with all the corruption, with all of those service delivery failures, the political violence, the people whose lives were being the most impacted by that poverty and inequality were, of course, women. And it was women who were holding together the families and the communities, and the women whose voices most desperately needed to be heard in the news. And at that time, I came across an organization very similar to Quote This Woman Plus in the UK. So I had an idea what to do to start, and that's when I founded us.
I mean, that's fantastic. You are making me think, just because you are linking it to sort of politics and the elections, we did a show also with a woman sort of political analyst or expert, and she was speaking about the importance of women's voices in women's representation in the elections, in politics, and so forth. And what she was saying, actually, the importance of women's voices there is that, as you said, women are most affected. Men might not necessarily think about it. I'm going to give a practical example because it really sort of resonated with me. When they're talking about installing taps or access to water in townships, they're thinking about, yes, people need access to water, but they're not necessarily thinking about the location of that tap and whether it's safe for a woman to get there. And so, just to hear somebody say that, I hadn't even thought about it. So is that sort of kind of what you're speaking about in terms of also bringing that voice into the media?
100%. One of the founding principles of Quote This Woman, Lenina, is that women and men experience life so differently. And where a tap goes, that's a perfect example. A man's experience of a tap is very different from a woman's experience of a tap. A woman's experience of a tap is all about unpaid labor. A man's experience of a tap is probably just about getting something to drink. And I'm sorry if I'm making generalizations. Sometimes one is forced to. But that stuff needs to actually come to the fore. And that's what's important in terms of getting women's voices heard. Because actually, when women's voices get heard in the media, that translates to women's voices getting heard at the decision-making table. So in so many instances. And that's what we're all about.
Oh, wow. I want to ask, Kathy, so on your website, you've got statistics about how little women are represented or quoted as experts in the media. There was a Gender Links report in 2019 around diversity and women's voices in the media. And what they quoted was that women's voices make up only 39% of news sources, and that in the news, women's sources are grossly underrepresented as experts, as first-hand accounts, eyewitness, and popular opinion categories. And I myself have beef with how few opinion pieces are done by women. So I was wondering whether you can give us more context around that. Yeah.
So this is a very important piece of research that Gender Links did. And the interesting thing about the Gender Links research is actually it was one of the most positive pieces of research we came across. And the reason why is because they were looking at a time when women's voices will feature, which is during the 16 days of activism. And, in December when they'd have those 16 days of activism. And one of the frustrating things is that there's certain times of year when everyone wants to interview a woman. So in Women's Month or around the 16 days of activism. And the rest of the year, it all drops off. So actually that skews the results. But generally, one finds that women's voices are heard less than 20% of the time as news sources. And there was some research done by Media Monitoring Africa that shows that generally, whatever your medium, so whether it's TV, radio, online news, only 20% of voices are women. And interestingly, what we don't really know is how that translates to community media or media that isn't in English, because there just haven't been resources to do that kind of research. And I'd love to know how many voices are heard in not English media in South Africa, how many women's or other marginalized voices. I wish someone would give us the money so we could do that research.
No, exactly. I mean, I hadn't even thought about it, but it's such an important point. I want to say something. So the gender links research, you're right, very important resource. It looked at points where, and I've been saying to, my colleagues or people in my group saying, oh, Women's Month is coming up, people are going to be calling now, and to capitalize on that. But you're making me think that when we use that context, if we say this is the month when women have spoken the most, and yet still within the research it shows that only 9% as experts, then it shows us this discrepancy anyway, that even though these are the months that women speak the most, what are the women speaking about? And we know that it's usually sort of, and those stories are important, but first person report, on the ground stories, lived experiences, still when it comes to expert GBV, how many women are really pulled in to speak about the statistics and the research and so forth, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's frightening that you can still have a man mansplaining on something like GBV, and it happens. It happens far too often that that even in areas that one would hope there would be the sensitivity to get a woman to speak, there will still be men experts asked to speak. And then just generally, a woman's voice is not heard on things that are traditionally male areas of expertise. So there's always going to be a skewed perspective. There's going to be a woman's topic, and then there's going to be another topic. And the other topic will always default to being a man's voice first until a huge amount of work is done in society. Lenina, I don't know if you've ever heard of that piece of research that if you ask a preschooler to draw a doctor or a scientist, they will draw a woman and a man equally. But as soon as that child is in school and you ask them to draw a doctor or a scientist, they will draw a man. So we're already gendering our children from such a young age to say, this person with these qualifications is a man. So you can imagine throughout the entire schooling, throughout the entire university, and then throughout adult life, we're told, if you're going to trust this person and this expertise, they need to be of a male gender.
Yes, I have seen that, and I have a little girl in grade 2, so I'm like hyper focused on sort of the type of things that she's exposed to, and how that's sort of informing her perceptions of gender and women and men and race. I want to ask Kathy. So the other side of this is the media, and you've been doing, Quote This Women have been running since 2019. You are obviously actively engaging with journalists and with the media to try and promote or encourage or push the use of women's voices as experts. I know when I first sort of started looking into this, it was a blind spot for me. I think I opened the show by saying I hadn't realized, until it was pointed out to me. Is it a blind spot for them as well? Do they just not realize that they're only using men? Are they just using the same old sources, and so it's just a cycle of using the people that they know, and historically the people that they know are men?
So that's a really good question. And I think to a certain extent, yes. When I started Quote This Woman, I had my own blind spots. I had my own preconceptions. I thought that it was going to be really, really difficult to convince journalists to use our database. And when I went and approached journalists and editors and said, how many women do you think you're quoting. Most of them said, oh, I think I quote equally 50% women and 50% men.
Oh, wow.
And when I pointed out the statistics to them, they were horrified. So generally, it is a blind spot. They think they quote more women than they do because the odd woman that they quote makes such an impact on them that they almost see that person as carrying so much more weight and taking up so much more space than they actually do. So in that way, it really is a blind spot. They're so used to just defaulting to that same male voice that is so easy to get hold of and so happily answers their questions that it's just automatic. So yes, I think it is a blind spot.
Can I add? So when I was doing print journalism, sort of before the Womxn Show, one of the things that I struggled with, though, I struggled to find women. And so, the first place we go to, I would go to sort of the news. I would go look for women. I would look for people if it was topic specific who had already been quoted before, so that would come into my research. But also just to find, I mean, there are still groups of women now when I do the Womxn Show and I'm trying to source specific, like Black female psychologists, for instance. I will say the visibility, even within even just having their own websites or own blogs or whatever, is really, really low. And so, is that also something that you found is a barrier? Is that a barrier for journalists, that there is just, and again, I think maybe it just points to a cycle. It's difficult to find them.
So 100%. And sorry, I started saying a point and I didn't finish it. I started saying that I had two preconceptions. The second preconception that I had was that it would be so easy to fill our database with women, that women would just rush to us and say, yes, I want to be an expert on the Quote This Woman database of experts. And in fact, that was really not the case. We struggled to find women who agreed to be on our database. And I think that really points to what you're saying. And when I dug into this, I found that there's been a lot of research that shows that generally women receive a lot less mentoring than men do in their careers. And they're a lot less likely to be invited to share the center stage early in their careers. So often they're a lot less confident in dealing with the media. There's a school of thought that actually says women hold themselves to much higher standards than men do. So when a woman says, yeah, I know a lot about the subject, she'll say that, but she'll still say, I know a lot, but not enough not to consider myself an expert. Whereas a man will say, well, I know a little bit about the subject, so that makes me an expert. And again, I might sound like I'm making generalizations, but there's been research that actually shows this.
No, I know.
Yeah, so for that reason, sometimes we really struggle to find women to join our database. And, I do media training, and often I'll get women come to me afterwards and say, in my culture, in my religion, I'm just not taught to bang my own drum. And I need to go through some kind of a media training program that really gets to grip not only with learning how to speak in front of a mic, but that looks at some of the psychosocial issues around imposter syndrome and patriarchy before I feel the confidence to stand in the spotlight and own my own space. So these are deep systemic issues that we're facing.
They are, and wow, I mean, I love that you brought in sort of it as a psychosocial issue, that you've spoken about that, like how I'm fascinated by how deeply ingrained like the resistance is, or this perception that the perception of like sort of not being good enough. And also the research you're telling me is resonating. There's also some wonderful research that shows a woman, and I stand under correction, I don't know the percentages 100%, but it goes something like, a woman will only apply for the job if she meets 90% of the criteria, and a man, if he's got 50%, if he meets 50% of the criteria, he'll apply for the job anyway.
Absolutely. So yeah, so all of these things that just constrict us as women. And then there's even the other side of it, is that when a man has agency, he's fierce, he's strong, he's powerful, that's accepted by society. But unless a woman is seen as based in her community, as tender and gentle and understanding, she's not accepted. So all of the women who break the mold and take the step forward and say, yes, I'm prepared to have the spotlight on me, those women are generally not liked. Both women and men have unconscious biases against women who position themselves as strong. So it's really, really not easy for the woman who is prepared to own her voice.
Yeah, and there's a I often think about, there is a cost, and there is a very real cost to visibility, and I think that that's what you are speaking about. That often women, when they are featured or when they are spotlighted, there is a high propensity for backlash. But Kathy, we need to take a quick break. We are going to come back and discuss this further. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You are still watching The Womxn Show, and we are speaking about the underrepresentation of women in the media, but we are also celebrating the women who do come out and raise their voices. And with me in studio is Kathy Magrobi from Quote This Woman, an organization that is helping to increase the representation of women in the media. And Kathy, before the break, we were talking about sort of how difficult it was to actually get women onto your platform to be listed as, as speakers on specific topics, as speakers, as experts, really. And, we ended off by speaking about how ingrained this resistance is, to speaking publicly, to visibility, to being in the spotlight. So now I want to bring in, you and I first connected over a LinkedIn post that I did, where I had said, for the first year of the Womxn Show, I literally couldn't watch myself on TV. Like, I wouldn't watch the broadcast. I'd go later on YouTube. And I remember I would just cringe, cringe throughout. All I could hyper focus on was all of the things that I perceived as wrong. And a lot of that, and I don't know if this will sound shallow, but a lot of it was also the way I looked, right, on TV, on screen. But I want to ask you, so you said you thought it would be really easy to get women onto your database, and actually there was quite a lot of resistance. Women were sort of not able, and I'm sure you found, as I found with the Womxn Show, regardless of their credentials, even as CEOs, even with master's degrees or PhDs, they struggle to position themselves as experts. So I want to start with the question is, what are some of the things that women have said, some of the excuses, some of them were in the comments on my LinkedIn and Facebook post. I want to sort of put out there, what are some of the things that powerful women say, why we're not positioned or good enough to speak on TV or in the media?
Yeah. And it's huge. I mean, this whole thing, I don't want to change our topic and talk about imposter syndrome and all of the many layers around that. And I don't really like that concept of imposter syndrome, but just to use that because it's an easy thing that a lot of people understand. That thought of I'm not good enough is just so deeply entrenched in the most powerful of women. And not because they're not good enough, but because of all of those psychosocial factors that come into play from the way we've been brought up. So a woman will say, I hate the sound of my voice. A powerful woman with a PhD and postdoctoral experience will say, I hate the sound of my voice.
Mm.
So there's a lot about appearance and voice. We have women who are so absolutely brilliant who say, I will do any print media interview, but I won't go on radio or TV because I hate the way I look or I hate the sound of my voice, which is incredibly frustrating when you know that all of that information could be so well encapsulated through the additional media of voice and picture, let alone just all of the audiences that serves, that print alone doesn't serve. So there's a lot to do with physicality, which is just so incredibly sad. So quote this woman, which considers itself a feminist organization, actually does training on what to wear for an interview, for a TV interview, which would seem so frivolous and so non-feminist. But we feel we need to do that in order to just take experts forward with us. And those are one of our most well-attended training sessions that we offer, is just what to wear, how to dress, how to make your face up, surprisingly. And then the things that beyond just, I don't like the way I look, I don't like the way I sound, are the things that we spoke about earlier. I don't think I'm qualified enough. And then interestingly, just I simply don't have time. So, which comes across to all of the burden of unpaid labor that women take on. And we've seen really uptick during the COVID pandemic. So many women are doing really, really important work, but they're also carrying such a big burden of unpaid labor that to take on the additional responsibility of preparing for a media interview, they simply can't do it. And as you can imagine, as soon as a woman comes forward and is known as a media personality, they get so many journalists coming forward and wanting to use them. So they say, whoa, can't do this anymore. So we actually have people leaving our database saying, I'm sorry, I'm being swamped. Wow. I can't do this. I just don't have time.
Wow. I mean, that's so powerful. I want to come back to physicality.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're changing the topic, because I think like all of this is integral to visibility and voice, right?
Yeah.
These are the reasons that there isn't visibility and voice, and there's a direct sort of correlation. So interestingly, we spoke about physicality. I used the word shallow when I spoke about myself sort of worrying about it. You used the term frivolous, and yet so there's a perception, right, that worrying about, and I can hear it as we're speaking. You're worrying about how we look and how we sound almost undermines, all of the sort of professional, the other narrative of professional and expert.
Yeah.
But I want to bring in, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because I want to give context. The biggest sort of example that comes to mind is Hillary Clinton. So there's been research done on that, and what has been called out over and over again was that when she was a presidential candidate, the amount of focus and emphasis on what she was wearing, right?
Yep.
And so is this, are we so worried about how we look and how we sound because we are generally criticized for that, and yet we've never really seen, a man might be criticized for what he said, a woman is criticized for how she looks, even if they're saying the same thing.
Absolutely. So you're right, and I'll take that as a slap on the wrist, because you are so right. And there's actually something that we because one of the things quote this woman does is we lobby media where we see them use conflicting standards, and we often go to journalists and say, have you heard of the reversibility test? And the reversibility test says, would you use a standard for a man that you've used for a woman. So sometimes a journalist will interview a woman and say, and she was wearing a beautiful dress, and the clothes she wore weren't appropriate for the role she was in. And then we'll say, hold on, would you make that comment about a man? And of course they wouldn't. You see it about sports teams, where a women's sports team's clothing are so important. A man's sports team's clothing is never important. So absolutely, women actually have no choice but to worry about what they wear, because society is interested in that, whereas society is not interested in a man's appearance. So you're absolutely right. These actually are important things based on your gender.
Yeah. And so the only way, I mean, I'm trying to think of something positive to say to follow that. And I think the only way sort of to break that cycle, right, is to get as many women as possible out there. And so quote, this woman now is running a campaign or a competition to add more women to the database in order to do just that. Can you tell us more about the competition?
I'd love to. So our competition that we're running is called Voices of the Year. And you know, what we do know is that women are doing an awesome job in trying to close the gender gap of who gets to make the news. So every time women hear about Quote This Woman, there are brave and courageous women who are stepping forward and saying, yep, I believe in this. I want my voice to be a part of this movement to try and make a change in society. And we also know that we're a tiny NGO and we haven't got a huge PR machine behind us. So we've decided to launch a Voices of the Year campaign that says, let's look at all of the wonderful women who have had their voices heard over the last year and find the top 10 women in 10 different categories, things like health, politics, business, social development, and let's reward them for making a difference and getting their voices heard, and at the same time encourage more women to join our database. And we've got some awesome judges who are going to help us choose the top 10 women, and we've asked you to be one of them.
Yeah, disclaimer, I am also going to be a judge. I mean, that sounds amazing. Let's follow with how can women sort of get involved and enter the competition or be part of the campaign?
So we launched this at the beginning of the week, and we drive women to our website, which is www.quotethiswoman.org.za, in order to nominate themselves or nominate other women. The good news is that you don't have to be a member of our database currently in order to enter. So if you are on our database, that's awesome. Please enter. But if you're not on our database, but you've got a strong voice that is being used in your community or in your media in order to make a change in society, please enter too, and please join our database. So all details are on our website. We're also going to be promoting it on social media. Please go to Twitter, to Snapchat, to Instagram, to Facebook, and share this and like it. We want to get the message out there, and we want all awesome change makers, opinion leaders, activists and experts who are women and other marginalized people who are experts to join us and to help us make a difference in this way.
So exciting, Kathy. I want to ask, because you mentioned earlier some of the not, I want to say excuses, but some of the reasons why women sometimes struggle with the platform or reluctant to join. And I don't sort of want to leave it there. This is a wonderful opportunity. It's something that's necessary. I believe in this because like I said to someone the other day, and the audience must forgive me, but I said, I'll be damned if in 10 years my daughter's 18 and she still has, 2% representation of women in the media that she is watching. So I want to ask, what is sort of the process? Someone joins Quote This Woman. What happens next? How do you connect them to the media and journalists? Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So someone wants to join as an expert. What happens is they'll go onto our website and we'll ask them for some details, a bit of a biography about them, which is not only about whether you have a PhD, because not every expert is someone who has studied. An expert can also be someone who is in their community doing amazing work, in their church or their mosque doing great, amazing work. So we're very much an organization that says an expert can be anybody who is doing any kind of social change work or any kind of important work. We say we started agriculture and we ended xenophobia, and we cover everything in between. So they'll come on, they'll give us information about themselves, and we'll obviously do some verification process. And then that information will be put onto our database, which is logged on the internet, and journalists are then given access to that. Once you join our database, we send out a media alert saying, look, we've got new people, so journalists know about the new experts. Then really it's up to the journalists to decide when something that they have a query about, so something that is trending in the news, is of interest to them. So Lenina, say you joined as an expert on the media in Cape Town. Say that was your area of expertise. And a journalist was interested in interviewing you. They'd contact us and say, we've got a media query about someone wants to set up a new media house in Cape Town. Do you know anyone who could speak on that? And we'd put them in, do you know anyone who could speak about the current state of media in Cape Town? We'd put them in contact with you, and they would then reach out directly to you and interview you. So we act as a channel, putting journalists in contact with you. And obviously, once the journalist has your contact details, they'll just speak to you directly thereafter. The other thing is we'd come back to you and say, if you need media training, please contact us. And we offer ongoing media training seminars and webinars as a part of our service, because we realize that the better we train our members of our database, the better women experts are out there.
Yeah, so the better they feel about, often we find they don't really need the training. They just sort of need to feel affirmed through having had that. Kathy, I want to ask also, on the show, and I will say, sometimes spent up to almost 2 hours on the phone with somebody, convincing them to come onto the show. And what has been lovely is that after they've been on, it's been it turns out to be this wonderful positive experience for them. Has there been positive feedback? What are some of the positive feedback from women who joined Quote This Woman, who finally put their voice out there? And I mean, not just from a career perspective, not just visibility. I found also intrinsically there's been, there's a powerful feeling associated by finally showing yourself and raising your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of women say that the reason that they join Quote This Woman and join our community is feeling that they belong to an organization that is activism at its best. So that we're actually doing something to break misogyny, and that they, by joining us, are joining that. So women are suddenly more aware of the power of their voices in changing the way society has been going. Another thing is women are suddenly realizing that they're part of a network of really powerful women. So sometimes women will reach out to us to access other women too through the database. And what happens at our training events is that you get this group, because we tend to keep our training events small, of 10 experts who suddenly bond together amazingly. You'll have a marine biologist talking to an epidemiologist and swapping telephone numbers, simply because they have a common understanding of what it's like to work in a male-dominated world.
Yeah.
So that is another huge thing that comes through. But let me tell you, there also is, we get women coming back to us and saying, the article that appeared in the New York Times, where I was quoted, actually got me noticed for the first time by my executive team. And next thing I was up for a promotion, or next thing I was sent on an international conference. So it's actually the power of the media and of media coverage is really huge and making a difference in people's careers too.
Wow. I mean, that is wonderful. And I think it also speaks to sort of the inequality and visibility. You know, you can be right in front of your boss for however many years and just sort of not be seen. And even they say people who are excellent, like above average at their jobs, rarely get promoted because, you know, they're just so efficient. And so they almost become invisible. And so this, I love that you gave that analogy that we have to work harder to be seen, and that this is one of the ways to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I was speaking to the media studies department at Rhodes, and they about this very concept, and they were saying they would love to do a study about how being one of the M&G's top women, you know, the M&G does they do the top young top South Africans, and then they do the top women in South Africa.
Okay, yes.
How being a visibility for women in those two categories actually makes a difference in women's careers. And exactly that someone who is super efficient and above average will not be noticed until they get that external affirmation from somewhere else, like M&G.
I would love to see that. Kathy, we are out of time. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I think it's going to resonate with so many of the audience members out there. Definitely, I feel like I have a sort of a broader understanding of the intricacies of visibility. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
Okay. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we've been speaking about the underrepresentation of women in the media. Now, we are almost at the end of our hour together, and we've had a great conversation about the power of visibility and voice for women and the power of raising our voices. And I'm speaking as someone who was really, really afraid to do this too. I want to encourage everyone to go and check out the Quote This Woman website and really seriously consider joining their database. Now, before we go, we are going to have a look at a short video about the power of raising women's voices. Let's have a look.
There's so many little nuggets that I'm taking from all of these conversations, and I think from the past one, it's this idea of locating freedom in telling our stories, and of the importance of telling all stories, whether of others or ourselves, with care and love, which I think is something so resonant today. And now I take us in another direction, one of a storyteller themselves, as I introduce a poet who will be speaking to us via video link. Lebogang Masango is a PhD candidate. She holds a master's in social anthropology from WITS, but she is also an award-winning writer and poet and author of the book Mpumi's Magical Bees, which is translated into all 11 official languages. She joins us now to perform a commissioned poem that is called We Are Women.
We women. What would we be if not for the wisdom of grandmother's hands? Her age folds of skin hold secrets, prayers etched tightly into crow's feet back then because she survived the worst of what humanity can be. But the warmth of her body, hugs that know you, and all the women you have been, you, her, your mother, your great-grandmother, all are present in the room every time you get together. You, daughter, make your whole bloodline smile. Every time you step out into the world and conquer everything, from doubt to dark days to difficult degrees. Just being you is enough, alive and living honestly. You are their pride, their gem, their first of many. And if nothing else, we women are the first women to keep surviving a global catastrophe. Between the climate crisis and the pandemic, to keep going against the gravity of grief is nothing short of epic. It just is, even though it shouldn't at all be. We women are always first to get up. We wake the day, confront cold snaps and frozen dew, prepare families' baths and breakfasts before work and school. We women are the silent street sweepers with black plastics tucked in pockets, swishing some kind of cleanliness into city streets, disappear at dawn, and like we were never there, return to even more rubbish heaps. We women put in work. Fruit and veg and stoke sweet selling, hair braiding, ever entrepreneurial and enterprising, cause this whole family's got to eat. From this horizon to that horizon, we women make houses into homes out of little more than 2 fish and 5 loaves. We women raise communities with our bare hands, bear the bridges of our backs to get everyone over to promised lands. We women have been first. First to be misnamed, misplaced, and disgraced, violated. They mistake us for rock, unbruised boulder. But bless our ancestors who summoned all their strength to let the world know that spirit is made of something more solid. Bless their journey, bless their hearts, bless their feet. 20,000 strong to Pretoria they marched for you and me. Bless our ancestors, like Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, whose fist gripped the sharp edge of the spear of the nation in times of trouble and triumph, tear gas and trials, kept that fist clenched and raised towards the sky through beatings, betrayals, and brutality. She mobilized, she mothered, she marched on to give all of us, her daughters, a light to look up to and see. So we women stand on the precipice of our individual destinies. We know that what makes us great is being part of an unbreakable chain of women who have survived, lived and thrived through erasure, violence and forced silence, kept community close as that bridge to get over to the other side. We take our place as every generation before us has done. We whisper to the future, the best is not yet still to come. We are the here and the now of it. The best and most brilliant to ever do it, the gold and glory of all of it. We working women, we waiting women, we weeping women, we winning women, we wonder.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Remember that Maya Angelou said, when a woman speaks up for herself, she speaks up for all women. So don't be afraid to raise your voice. And that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.